Welcome to today's session. This is a writing tutorial to help you write a compare and contrast essay. For this tutorial, you're going to need some materials, such as a pen or a pencil to take down any important notes, a notepad if you prefer to write any tips that you hear in this tutorial, your laptop or a tablet so that you can write your response to the essay as you watch the tutorial, a set of headphones to listen to the tutorial privately. Make sure that your smartphone is actually switched off so you can concentrate on the tutorial from start to finish. And there are a lot of small details that I'll be going through to help you understand how to apply sentence analyses so that you don't waste any time checking or sending messages. Switch off your phone so that you can stay focused. And of course, a good study attitude and commitment to this entire tutorial. And make sure that you are writing along and completing an entire essay in your first attempt. In an English language reading and writing course, you will generally find there are 4 areas which you'll be studying. The first is vocabulary, which are our single isolated words, but without any grammar rules associated with these words. Language development, which is somewhere in between learning these isolated words and the grammar rules, so it could be larger phrases that you're using. The actual grammar, which is the way we put our words together to form sentences, and the rules about time, or what we call tenses. And then, of course, the general receptive and production skills, which are, in this case, reading as a receptive skill and writing as your production skill. So what thinking process do you go through when you're actually writing? Well, if you look at the Bloom's Revised Taxonomy, there are 6 critical thinking levels. And when you're going through the writing process, you'll actually be using all of these thinking levels. So recalling information from your knowledge, trying to understand that information and summarize its characteristics, applying some new language items that you've learned or structures, analyzing some maybe research that you found online, trying to form your own opinions about that research by evaluating it, and then putting all of these skills and all of this type of thinking process alongside your creative thinking process when you're actually writing the essay. So you're going to be working on both the lower order thinking skills and the higher order thinking skills as you are writing this essay today. Here is the question that will be used in the tutorial today. So the aim is to write an answer to this question using a compare and contrast essay structure. Some people say that red and grey squirrels are similar. Others say they are completely different in their own right. Discuss both of these views using examples and reasons to support your answer. So I'll be using this to guide you through the essay structure today. On your end, what you should be doing is trying to answer this question as you follow the steps and tips from the tutorial. So your question is going to be, again, writing an answer using the compare and contrast essay structure. Some people say parents should encourage their children to take part in organised group activities in their free time. Others say that it is important for children to learn how to occupy themselves on their own. Discuss both of these views using examples and reasons to support your answer. So make sure you take maybe a snapshot of this question, have your laptop or tablet ready, and as you go through the tutorial and the tips, you're going to be pausing at each stage which is relevant to you and trying to write your answer to this question in a similar style to how I will be doing today using my question. Now, if you know anything about the Cefr levels, or the Common European Framework for Referencing Levels, this is a global international framework where we measure our language level. It doesn't matter what language you're studying. So usually students start off as basic learners at the A1 level. They move on to A2, then B1, B2, C1 and C2. So C1 and C2 are near native level. So we're somewhere here at the middle at the B2 level. So our language is going to be targeted towards that level and not too far off from a C1 level either. In this essay structure, what I want to be seeing is some type of introduction that uses a narrowing funnel approach. In that, we're going to be working on how to write a hook, how we use facts, statements of facts, and how we paraphrase to show that we know something about the topic. How to write a problem statement. You can put this in if you want, or you can leave it out, but it just makes your essay look a lot better if there is some type of problem statement, even within a compare and contrast essay. Now, the thesis statement and the aims of the essay, these are interchangeable, so you can have one or the other, and they very much do the same thing. But if you want to be quite specific in terms of their content, a thesis statement will essentially tell the reader what the main idea is of the entire essay. Doesn't necessarily have to be an opinion here because we're doing compare and contrast, but your statement does need to be a statement of fact which is actually linked to a problem, and that makes a very good compare and contrast essay. And of course here the aims of the essay actually make the essay structure clearer to the reader. So here I try to make a distinction between the thesis statement and the aims of the essay, and that will make more sense as we look at the example. Next is the main body 1 and the main body 2, so that's our paragraph 2 and 3. So our introduction is our paragraph 1, main body 1 will be paragraph 2, main body 2 will be paragraph 3. But within the main body you can see that the structure stays the same. We are trying to focus on topic sentences, how we make our paragraph unified, not just within itself but with the rest of the essay structure. How do we include supporting sentences and details, and how we can use concluding sentences within the main body, not just at the end of the essay. Within the main body I'm looking for different language techniques, how we use academic vocabulary and academic verbs, even comparative adjectives for this particular style of essay. On the critical thinking level, you are comparing and contrasting facts, and you are using language related to this style. So how you bring two ideas together which are similar if you are comparing, how you bring two sentences together and make sure that they are combined using contrasting words. So we'll go through that, and also other types of words which are useful and other types of structures which are useful, such as relative clauses, prepositional phrases when we're talking about advantages and disadvantages, transition phrases to make sure our ideas and our sentences stay together in a very natural way, so how they are cohesive, so these cohesive devices, how we work on repetition and we avoid making our language sound boring, and of course using pronouns effectively instead of repeating nouns all the time. There will also be some grammar related to concluding sentences. I want to look at if and will, if and not, or an unless as structures that we can use as we conclude our paragraphs and as we work towards giving some type of predictive language. Finally, in the concluding paragraph, we're going to do the opposite of what we did in the introduction. So we're going to go through a widening funnel approach, where I'm going to work on restating the thesis statement in a paraphrased way to summarise main ideas and important information, and not necessarily adding any new information or opinions, but trying to work towards language that connects to the wider world, so future language predictions or recommendations. So let's have a look at the introduction, which is using that narrowing funnel approach. You need a hook to grab the attention of your reader, a statement of fact to state what is already known about the subject, a problem statement, usually to set the essay style, to show specifically that there is some type of problem that underlines this compare and contrast. Your thesis statement that very clearly sets the main idea of the essay, and the aims that will set the boundary will show that there's going to be a very clear structure to the essay. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of this introduction. Many animals have tails, but not all of them are able to use them as a parachute if they jump from a very high tree, but squirrels can. A squirrel is in fact a type of mammal from the family of rodents like a rat or a mouse. While squirrels may appear agile and look friendlier than rats, some of them are known to cause several problems in states such as the United Kingdom. Both red and grey squirrels' lifestyles appear to be near identical, though the physical characteristics of red squirrels are different and their numbers are in decline in the UK, whereas grey squirrels are dominant in their physical features and in their numbers. A comparison between the red and the grey squirrel will be the focus of this essay. Let's have a look at this introduction in more detail. So the first sentence, which comes from our funneling approach, starts with the phrase many. Use determiners like many when you are generalising. Since we're at the higher end of our funnel approach, we want to generalise and not get too specific just yet. So using many for countable nouns or much for singular or uncountable nouns. Make sure that the verb that follows, and in this case it's have, agrees with the subject. So we have the plural subject, so we use the plural verb have. If it was singular, we would have used has. So this is often a common mistake when it comes to mechanics in student writing, subject-verb agreement. So it also agrees with the object, which is tails, because we are working with a plural subject. Now we want to add some information, and we want to show that there is a change of direction. So here we put a comma after the first subject-verb-object structure, and we write the word but to indicate a change of direction. You could also use the word however, but the punctuation would change. So here, when we use the word but, we put a comma before but to compound this sentence with the second sentence without having to write them separately, but to try to compound them together. If we use the conjunction however, we would need to put not a comma here, but a semicolon, and we would also have to put a comma after the word however. So remember this when you are using however in the middle of a sentence to combine your first sentence with your second. Here we have this attention grabber. So what's interesting about this information is we're saying many animals have tails, but not all of them can use them the same. And what we've included here is the idea of a tail being like a parachute. Now a parachute is often, or only usually, associated with human beings and not animals. And now what we're saying is that animals are using their tails as parachutes if they jump from a very high tree. But not many animals are jumping from very high trees. So what we have here is the if clause to put you in this situation as a reader so that you can imagine. And this is known as the real conditional, where we write a sentence that has subject, verb, object at the beginning here. There's no punctuation here when if is in the middle of those two sentences. And then the second sentence, the situation that we want you to imagine. So it's adding more information to this. Is it necessary to add this information? Not really, but it does add to the details. Now here what we have is the focus of the attention grabber, that aha moment. So now we narrow down our focus to not all animals but squirrels. So we're trying to show not just to the person who's written the question that we are staying on topic, but also to our reader that our focus is only going to be about squirrels and not all animals. So this is just some interesting information about squirrels, and it's not the focus of the paper. If the reader, for example, has never lived in a country where there are squirrels, you may want to explain what a squirrel is. So having a statement of fact is important. So here is our statement of fact, using language of fact. So the subject that you are going to be contrasting, a squirrel, make sure that your verb agrees and that you've included language of fact, because this is your statement of fact. Offset this phrase in fact with 2 commas. So the squirrel is in fact, and then you have this idea that some factual information is coming, so it's a signal phrase. And then you have the statement of fact, which is in fact a definition, a type of mammal from the family of rodents. And this is part of the statement of fact. It's offset with a comma, like a rat or a mouse. This is a clarification of these words mammal, rodents, in case you want somebody to really understand what you're talking about and may not know what this phrase rodent means. It's also a good way of showing, especially when you are studying the language, that to your teacher that you know what these words mean too. Okay, so that you've not just copied and pasted these words, but you have some idea of what they mean. Make sure that the punctuation is clear. So when you are doing this clarification part using the word like, you need to make sure that there is a comma before it. Okay, and this works for other phrases like if you wrote comma in the same way as or comma similar to. So these type of metaphorical phrases that explain that the squirrel is like a rat. It isn't a rat, but it's like a rat. Okay, so just to clarify unfamiliar words. Then we get more specific and we are narrowing down our focus. So we've got some type of problem statement here that focuses our essay to the idea that the compare and contrast is actually going to highlight a problem, and it's only going to be specific to the United Kingdom. So conjunction language, this conjunction while, allows us to start using the language of comparison. So while is a very good conjunction word that relates to the language of comparison. Here, when I say may appear agile and look friendlier than rats, I'm actually going back to these 2 sentences. It's called cohesion. So all of this language here, being able to jump from a very high tree, I've summarized into one word, agile. And then here where I've said the family of rodents, when anyone thinks of a rat or a mouse, I know most people might feel a bit uneasy. So I've summarized this into look friendlier than rats, because that's the common perception of a squirrel, that they actually look friendlier than rats. So Notice how the language is cohesive. It's bringing these two ideas into our problem statement sentence. It's keeping the connection to all the sentence, and that's what cohesion means. So sometimes students lack cohesion in their writing. They're not able to keep that link between each sentence. Okay, so try to do this using the construction while sentence number 1 and sentence number 2. What in fact is the actual problem that we're dealing with? And here again, generalizing, because we're still in the introduction, some of them. Okay, so this pronoun them refers back to squirrels. Rather than repeating the word squirrel, 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 while you're still in that sentence, try to use pronouns. So some of them, okay, generalizing, we're not going to give a specific number at the moment, are known to cause several problems in states such as the United Kingdom. So some of them are, make sure that your subject agrees with the verb, and don't forget that it's often the case that students are not using the verb. So we have what we call fragmented sentences. So we are always looking out for verbs, making sure that as teachers we are saying, okay, was that subject here, some of them, linked to the object with a verb? Make sure there is a verb always in your statements. Now, known to is also a phrase which is good to use in your writing when you are talking about a very well-known problem. So, smoking is known to cause cancer. So, known to harm people. So, known to plus a verb is very good when you are trying to indicate a problem that is very well known and it's not fake information. So some of these schools are known to cause problems. If this is a problem statement, there's nothing too specific here in terms of what the problem actually is. We don't want to actually introduce anything too specific here, but we do want to narrow our focus and say, well, we are only going to be focusing on the problem that's in the United Kingdom when we're comparing red squirrels and grey squirrels. Here is the end of our introduction, so the last parts of our introduction, so both red and grey squirrels lifestyles. As you can see now we are getting into our thesis statement where it's going to be very clear what our essay is going to compare, both of them, the two subjects we're comparing and contrasting. So it's the red and grey squirrels. Use the apostrophe after S when you are showing ownership. So red, we are comparing their lifestyles, so this lifestyle belongs to both the red and grey squirrels, so that apostrophe after S shows ownership. Okay, so plural subjects that have this apostrophe after, the noun, any noun that comes after, is what they own. It belongs to them. Okay, so you can imagine if you said, for example, my sister's cup, so that S apostrophe, my sister's cup apostrophe before the S is for singular subjects, but where you've got plural subjects with the S, put the apostrophe after, not before. So the lifestyle belongs to these red and grey squirrels. And don't forget that the verb here is appear, so we have our subject, both red and grey squirrels lifestyles, that's the actual subject position. Our verb has to match. Where things are plural, do not put an S on the verb. Okay, so this is known as a plural verb. If you remember that S stands for singular, you only put S on the verb to make it singular when your subject is singular. Okay, or if it's uncountable, a noun which is uncountable. And then appear to be is also a nice academic verb phrase. We use the phrase appear to be when something looks the same but actually isn't. Okay, so what we're saying is that their lifestyles are near identical. Again, this phrase near identical, meaning they're almost identical, but they're really not. So try to use these academic verbs and language of comparison. Okay, they're near identical, almost the same. And then you can see we've used this comma before the word though in exactly the same way that we've used it for but, meaning that we're going to change the direction. You could have used however here, you could have used but try not to repeat. Okay, so instead of using but, we will use though. And careful of the spelling. It's very close to the spelling of thought. It doesn't have a T in it. The GH at the end is silent, though. And the same structure again. You can see it's being repeated, the same sentence structure where you're compounding two ideas. Your first idea is you think their lives are the same, but, although, these are the things which are different. Okay, so we're saying their lifestyles you could compare, but we're going to show you something which you can contrast. So though is a great way of changing the direction with words like but or however. So those conjunctions are important. So here is the idea of our first essay. So here is how we're going to technically structure our first essay. We're going to look at the physical characteristics of red squirrels and why they are different. And then we're going to look at idea number 2, why their numbers are in decline, specifically in the UK. So make sure that when you're getting those two ideas, and we only want two ideas here in this 4-paragraph essay, it's not a long essay. So two ideas have to be brought together using a compound sentence, comma and making sure you put that subject before you put the verb and the object on either side of that comma and structure. Make sure you keep it specific, and remember we mentioned previously that we are focusing on the UK only, and then you see here we've mentioned that the red squirrel's physical characteristics are different and their numbers are declining, meaning going down. So what about the grey squirrel? Well, introduce that with a comma before whereas to show you're going to change direction. So we're saying red squirrels look different and their numbers are going down, whereas meaning, okay, so we're going to find something different here. Grey squirrels are actually dominant and in their features, meaning their characteristics, and in their numbers. So we see that their numbers are actually going up. So we now know what idea number 1, our main idea number 1, and main idea number 2 is going to be in the essay. We are comparing physical characteristics and we are comparing their numbers. And that's why you just make sure, as if you're kind of concluding with the aim, this is the limit of the essay. I'm going to be comparing the red and grey squirrel, and this is my limit. Okay, that will be the focus of this essay. So that thesis statement and the aim show that you aim not to go out of the boundary of red and grey squirrels, but that thesis statement I think is key. This is exactly the points where you are going to be comparing and contrasting. So you can mention language where they can be comparable, meaning the same, but use that though to show that there are things about them which are different, and make it even more specific by saying what's specifically different about the red squirrel and what is specifically different about the grey squirrel, and leave it there. Don't add any more specific details. Okay, let's move on to the main body. Let's just keep our focus. We are trying to use topic sentences, concentrate on our paragraph unity, using supporting details and sentences to make our ideas stronger, and also this concluding sentence at the end of the paragraph. It may contain an opinion or prediction, but this opinion or prediction should not overshadow the main focus of the essay or the style, which is a compare and contrast essay. This is not an opinion essay. Okay. So let's start with identifying and bringing out immediately our two subjects that we're comparing or contrasting. Making sure that our verb agrees, but if there is more than one subject, so it could be electric cars and cars that use petrol are, okay? And then very clearly stating the contrasting reference. What is it that is different about them? Where are you going to be staying on topic? So what is the topic itself that is going to be compared? So here we have appearance, and then here we use the word but without any punctuation. So the conjunction is used to bring together two ideas, the contrasting reference and the comparing reference. So it's not a compound sentence. These are not two sentences, because after the word but, it starts with the verb. There's no subject there. So be careful not to use a comma before but. It's not putting together two sentences. But where you're putting together two ideas, where in fact either the second or the first sentence is fragmented, meaning it doesn't have a subject, you can avoid using a comma before that. But look very clearly how this sentence has our subjects, it agrees with a verb, to either the contrasting and comparing references. We've used the word but to show that here they contrast, but here they are similar. Okay? So make sure that the language is clear. You've got that full stop at the end of the sentence, all the punctuation is in order. So that is your topic sentence of your paragraph. Okay? That has to be that at the very beginning of main body 1. Try not to start writing specific details without showing the reader that this is the topic and this is what we're going to be sticking to throughout the entire paragraph. Okay, so that's the pole that's going to bear your flag. The next sentence here, as you can see just from the outset, I can see a lot of numbers coming up, so it means that we should be somewhere here where we are starting to include details. So names and numbers are details. Let's go into the analysis of this sentence. Here we are now breaking it down. We're pulling out of this topic only one of the subjects, and we're going to describe its appearance. So the red squirrel, and you see the subject-verb agreement changes. So now we've only got one subject with a singular verb, is. And then we use the phrase, the contrasting phrase about appearance. So state it very clearly. 10 to 15 inches long. So this is one contrasting reference. Put a comma here if you're going to list more. Okay, so here we're talking about listing, not necessarily a compound sentence. So avoid using this red squirrel, the red squirrel, the red squirrel, and use pronouns to refer back to the subject, okay, so that we know that it is referring to a singular subject, and this allows you to have better cohesion within the sentence. Again, you've got your verb, subject, verb and object. It can have a tail length of up to 6 inches. Put a comma again and use the conjunction and to show that you're on your last example. This is essential. That comma and is not only to make a compound sentence, but where you've got more than 3 things in a list, it is the indication that we're on our last example. And here we talked about the length of its actual body, the length of its tail, and its weight. Now, interestingly, in this last example, it weighs about 330 grams. We could have stopped there, but there's additional information here. Using the word when, if you want to show that something happens at a point of time, and this point of time here is the point where it becomes an adult. So we have 2 points of times in our life. when we are children, or 3 maybe when we're babies, children, and then adults. So you're using this word when to make this detail more specific. The squirrel doesn't weigh 330 grams when it's a baby. It only weighs 300 when, and then you have that subject, verb, object structure straight after. It is, so it being the subject, is being the verb, a fully grown adult. And that must refer to a specific period in time. So, time is not just written in numbers, such as 10 o'clock, when it's 14 years old. It is also written as whole sentence phrases. And when you're able to do this at this level, you create more, you create language which is more appealing, and it's not very dry. It has more style to it. So it's really important that you try to use words to describe in areas where you are using time or number references. Okay, so another way of saying 6 inches could be it has a very short and stumpy tail. So that would have actually elevated this language where you can change numbers into more descriptive language. But you need a balance. Sometimes you need to show numbers, and sometimes you need to have that described in words. So make sure that balance is there. Now, as you're contrasting appearance, it's really important to have that mixture. Make sure the numbers are clear, the language of description is clear, to elevate your language to the B2 level. What can you notice here? Immediately when we start, we have a contrasting linking phrase, which is set off with a comma. It starts the sentence. So when you have any type of linking phrase, what do I mean by linking phrase? Well, the word contrast means that something different is coming. We are trying to link this sentence with the sentence before. So if we spoke about the red squirrel here, we must be talking about the grey squirrel here, because we said that in the beginning in our topic. We said this is the order we're going in, red and then grey, appearance and then habitats. So here we are doing the contrast. We are showing the difference. We are sticking to our topic. So that's the second subject you're contrasting, making sure the verb agrees with the subject. The verb here, measure, carries the S for the singular subject. Using language like adverbs adds more detail to the verb itself. So you can say a very short tail, and you can add description to a noun, but you can also make your verbs descriptive. So words like approximately help to give additional information to the verb, especially when you're talking about numbers. So we're saying it's not exactly, or it could be almost 12 to 20 inches long. That's our first measurement. That's our contrasting reference. And here, to try to make sure that we're not having sentence structures which repeat in the structure itself. So we can work on not repeating words, but students often don't change the style of the sentence structure itself. Here we had a list. 1 contrasting reference, 2 contrasting reference, and 3. Here I've changed the structure so that we don't start immediately with the subject. We use a linking phrase. We put in the first contrasting reference again, which is matching. It's talking about how long the squirrel is. But I don't immediately go on to talk about the tail length. I put a comma and use the word so, because I want to add additional information that clarifies what I've just written, and that makes sure that I'm being cohesive I'm not going to just mention that it's long without doing my job and comparing. The idea here is to compare, not simply just to state information. You must be cohesive. So using the word so as a conjunction allows you to put a sentence in the subject-verb-object structure straight after. It is, so it refers back to the grey squirrel, slightly longer, as you have to do some calculation. You're not very good at math, then I'm very sorry for you. And then what we are comparing it to. This is cohesiveness. Keep your ideas linked together. Don't simply state numbers without showing why they're important. And here again, in addition, again that transition phrase, and the punctuation there is with the comma. That transition phrase is also a cohesive device that says, listen, I'm going to be adding more information. Now, why do I need to add in more information? Because actually I've not finished. Here I have 3 pieces of information. Here I've only mentioned 1. Okay, so we then go in order. Its tail can reach up to 9 inches long. So avoid using repetition of the grey squirrel and use the pronoun. Okay, why do we not have an apostrophe before the S? Because this is not the word it with the verb is. When you put the S on it without an apostrophe, it is saying the subject, grey squirrel, has something that belongs to it. Okay, so it's the ownership. Then can reach. Notice that when you use helping verbs that talk about ability with a main verb like reach, it doesn't matter whether your subject is plural or singular, that verb reach will never take or never carry the S. Okay, so its tail can reach, their tails can reach. So once you introduce some type of auxiliary or helping verb about the ability of something, then the main verb doesn't change in its form. So its tail can reach, and then you have that contrasting appearance. And notice that when we're using numbers, I don't know if that's going to be always the case. It could change as, the lifestyle of squirrels change. But I would say that when you say words like up to before a number, that means the limit. It can't go more than that. So try to use qualifying language with your numbers. And then we've got that reference to contrasting the appearance. Using a comma before and, we've been here before, we are using a compound sentence. We can see the word it again as our subject, and then can weigh. So these are all possibilities. We're not trying to say it does, and it's always the case that it's always 9 and it's always 400 grams. Sometimes it could be 8 inches. Sometimes it could be, 399 grams. So we're not trying to be so specific. So that's very important to use language like can and can before the verb. And then that last contrasting reference. And you see it has a similar function here, using over, meaning it's not, the number that I've got is a nice clean round number, easy for the reader, but I didn't want to write 423 because it looked awkward and it would mean the reader would have to concentrate too much. So using language such as over helps me to keep that information factual. And then as is used in a similar way to when, but here not for a point in time, but here we say as an adult. Can also, the word as is used here to refer to the purpose Okay, so it's the purpose of mentioning 400 grams is that we are talking about the adult weight, not a child's weight. Moving on to the next piece of information. Here we introduce the disadvantages related to a piece of information, a piece of contrasting information that we've mentioned in the previous sentence. Now, it's a good practice here to highlight either an advantage or a disadvantage when you are comparing or contrasting. Though this is not an advantage-disadvantage essay, the point of leaving this to later within the main body is because you are able to add to the style of the essay, but not to dominate it with either opinions or advantage, disadvantage and structure. It will be clear why we use the disadvantages now, because it's actually sophisticated, in a very sophisticated way, combined with a contrast. So have a look at how this works. Here we start with a prepositional phrase to introduce an advantage or a disadvantage in the structure using the phrase one of the, and then you use either the word advantages, which carries the S, or disadvantages, and the preposition of. Then you add your situation next to it before adding the verb is. The reason why we use one of is because we're taking it out of all the types of disadvantages, which we've pluralized. It must carry the preposition of in order to initiate your situation or the thing. So one of the disadvantages of what's the situation? Being bigger, being a student, living in the countryside. And then because you've mentioned the word one, you must let it agree with your verb is. So here is our disadvantage, choice of habitats. Here you can either, after the word is, use your noun form of the word or the verb form. So the verb form could be choosing, carrying the ing. Usually the ing, some people will argue and say that this is actually the gerund because it follows the verb is, but it's not in the continuous form. So the gerund form, using the ing, choosing the best habitat, or choice of habitats if you're going to use the noun form. So I've chosen to use the noun form here. So know that with words we either have verb or noun forms with particular words, especially after phrases, prepositional phrases that introduce advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so make sure you are writing that in the correct grammatical form, choosing either your verb form with the ing or your noun form, usually with carrying the particle of. Remember we said that we initially thought their lifestyles appeared identical, so let's show where we thought that this was the case here. So in spite of is a really nice phrase used to say that in spite of what I'm going to show you in X, Y is actually the most important information that I want you to focus on. So in spite of their appearances being, or both animals enjoying the places which are warm in the cold winter months, okay, so despite this, then you introduce the word neither to show that a contrast, that neither of them like this. So it's a very sophisticated way of showing a similarity. So try to use that construction when you're showing something similar. They like this, but both of them don't like this. So two similarities. So here is a positive, in spite of, even though they enjoy this, neither likes this. Okay. So this is a nice construction that you can use. Concentrate on the where the comma is. It comes at the end of the in spite of clause, And remember that when you are comparing and showing that they're the same, use language that shows that you're grouping them, both mammals. It stops you from repeating red and grey squirrels. So then we have neither or neither to indicate that you're about to change direction. And this academic language is important. Show that you understand words by providing the specific information. So neither like to be hunted by predators. I mean, what does predators mean? Does your teacher know that you know this word? We'll show your teacher that by using language, referencing and phrases such as like or such as, and then make it specific, such as owls. So here we know that an owl is a type of predator, and predators are linked to the verb hunted, which means they must be dangerous. Okay, so neither like to be hunted by predators such as owls. Then we introduce the word however to show that we are pulling it back from a we're comparing similarities to contrasting their features or their differences within the habitat. So however, again, look at the punctuation, the semicolon after the word owls. It's next to the word owls, there's no space. But once that semicolon is there, put a space and then write the word however, and then let the comma hook on to the end of however, no spaces. Okay, so careful of spacing between how you punctuate. It's often an issue when we are marking student work. So that word however is an indicator that something different is coming now. And we are saying that the larger grey squirrel, so that descriptive language, rather than mentioning the number of its length, change the number into language such as larger grey squirrel, and then you want to use different types of language development here that you've learnt. So when we were comparing before, we could either use comparative adjectives. The grey squirrel is larger than the red squirrel. There was also a comparative structure where you could use the particle as, and then the adjective in the middle, and then as at the end. So the larger grey squirrel is as scared as the red squirrel. So as and as makes something feel like they're similar. So when we use as here and cut off the end of it, so we cut off the end as. So here we have as many smaller holes in places to hide in. When we cut off the last as, we make our reader imply or try to imagine what the end result is. And that's a nice style to use. Stops you from being too wordy, makes you concise. So we know here that based on all the language that has been written in the previous sentences, that squirrel can't find as many small holes as places to hide in as who? As the red squirrel. So this is implied into the language. It's fine to cut it off, just to make sure you're not too wordy and you're concise. And then you've got this additional language, or escape the cold. And then we've got this language of because of. And this because of is a good way of bringing in reasoning. Okay? So don't ever leave your reader hanging. Why can't the larger squirrel find as many holes? Because of its size. And that's why I mentioned larger. So refer back. Its size is the problem. Refer back. Don't leave us hanging for the answer why. So we've mentioned something about the habitat being the same. They don't like having predators, but we've also mentioned something of contrast. So we've got something the same here. They both don't like to be hunted by predators in the place that they live. They both like warm places in the cold winter months. But we will also want some contrast. The grey squirrel can't find smaller holes, but what about the red? What about the red squirrel? Mention that clearly. red squirrels also tend to. So using language like tend to avoids generalizations. It's not always the case that they do what? That they forage in high treetops. But what you can mention is that you can contrast even within the subject itself. You don't have to contrast the red to the grey squirrel, but you can also show a contrast within the situation of the red squirrel. So red squirrels also tend to forage to eat. So try to use academic verbs rather than to eat. We will use to forage high up in the treetops rather than, so that rather than is the language of comparison here, on the ground. So we've got treetops and ground being compared as places where the red squirrel eats. And then this language which is a relative pronoun refers back to this entire sentence and this entire information. So, forage high up in the treetops helps to protect them. Who is them? So this again, this is language which refers back to red squirrels. And then I've crossed out whereas because somewhere before I've used this word whereas, so I'd rather use some different language of comparison or contrast. So while on the contrary, so the word while initiates this contrast. It tells the reader, yeah, she's about to bring a contrast, or he's about to bring a contrast. And this can often be used with this construction, comma, on the contrary, comma. It's offset by two commas, and it's a clarification phrase that this word while, though in English can mean at the same time, in this sentence I want it to mean there is a contrast, not we are talking about the same time. So you will see this often in written pieces, the word while, comma, on the contrary, comma. To make it clear to the reader, we're not talking about time here. We are talking about there being a difference. Then you have red squirrels then contrasted directly here within the same sentence as grey squirrels. So you have red squirrels in the treetops while grey squirrels, and I had initially written on the ground, but you can see that repetition. Avoid doing repetition and try to find a different way of saying on the ground, which means maybe on the forest bed, because you typically find squirrels in a forest or in gardens. So here I put on the forest bed, which is in the same way as saying on the ground of the forest. So then, if we go in, we look and see that we have an if clause here. Once I see this towards the end of the paragraph, I know that the student is trying to conclude something or provide some type of predictive phrase. Try to end your paragraphs on a prediction which is close to the facts. Okay, so if a predator, so we've used this idea of predator owl, wants to hunt a squirrel, it will most likely swoop to the ground to catch its predator and will probably not hunt for them in the treetops or canopy. Look at this very sophisticated way of saying that the grey squirrel is more in danger than the red squirrel. So it's actually summarising what life is like for, the lifestyle is like for the red and the grey squirrel. The red squirrel is less likely to be hunted for because it's in the treetops, or I've used a canopy, whereas the grey squirrel is most likely going to be hunted for. So using if construction with most likely helps to add predictive language. Will definitely, for something which you're 100% sure, will probably, for probabilities, and will probably not, here we've used to show that it's not really going to happen. Okay, So this is a good way to make predictions about the facts that you're using, so those modals and adverbs of certainty. Remember, avoid repetition where possible, so where you can see all of these crossed out pieces of information. I've tried to find synonyms to stop the language sounding boring. So far we have this now, our introduction and our main body 1, and you can see where I've kept those crossed out words just to indicate that we're trying to keep it fresh and not so boring. Now let's stay focused. We already spoke about the appearance and the lifestyle so the lifestyles and the characteristics of the red and grey squirrels, but we also mentioned that we wanted to talk about their numbers. So I'm going to pull that down into my second main body. Remember, we're trying to use topic sentences, stay on topic, and provide those details and concluding sentences. Now, in this part of the tutorial, you've looked at how we do sentence analysis, how we identify as teachers where you're using your commas, your full stops, your language of compare, contrast. Are you using semicolons in the right place? Do you know where to put the apostrophe? Does your subject agree with your verb? All of these things are being constantly marked throughout your paper. But we're also marking your structure too. So we're generally looking at that entire paragraph and saying, you know, as I look at it from a distance, does that look like a paragraph that is cohesive, that stays together, that is organised well, and is properly constructed in a way that guides me through the essay in a nice and easy way. So let's have a look at how we could structure our second main body. Have a look at these first two sentences. So it's not only the physical characteristics and lifestyle that distinguishes the red and grey squirrel, there are also noticeable differences in squirrel populations across the UK. In that first sentence of main body 2, you want to use a sentence that connects your beginning of this paragraph to what you've just previously written. That cohesion is so important. So phrases like, it is not only the physical characteristics, means, yes, I know I've written about the physical characteristics and I'm trying to tell you here that it's not only this which I'm here to compare or contrast. And then make it very clear what you are going to contrast. Use a topic sentence. There are differences in squirrel populations, and make sure it is specific to either your location or time or wherever it is that you want to narrow your focus down to. So that cohesive sentence that links this paragraph to the rest of the essay, to that introduction and main body 1, and also that second sentence, which is in fact that topic sentence that shows I'm staying on my topic. I'm only here to talk about population numbers. Then we've got recent ecological studies have shown that the grey squirrel numbers are increasing at an alarming rate. You can see where I can see the word population and I've taken that out. So population, singular here, I crossed out the singular verb and put squirrel numbers, which is a synonym for the population of squirrels, and then you used are. This is a supporting sentence. If you know in your topic that there have been so many studies done and that are very well known, you know, in our societies, then you are free to use the phrase recent studies or studies show. Try to use qualifying language that makes it specific to your topic. So we are talking about animals, therefore they must have been ecological studies, not necessarily scientific studies or medical studies or engineering studies. So you can qualify the language here by making it specific to your topic. And then you have languages increasing at an alarming rate. So you want to use lots of idioms as well in your language. Alarming comes from the word alarm. So when you hear an alarm, it's very loud, it's noisy, like a fire is going on. It means that it grabbed the attention. The numbers, when they started to increase, grabbed the attention of people in the UK. So it's really important that when you're trying to reach this B2 level, you start to use idiomatic phrases in your writing. This supporting sentence is still quite general. So now we're almost funneling down into more specific details. And you can see that happening also in main body 1, that we are still using a sort of funnel, a widening to narrowing funnel approach. So we've gone from the wide, big general information, and now we want to get quite specific here. Here we get very specific. You can see those numbers just jump out at you. Using specific numbers and language of comparison adds to the details of your essay. There are. What does there refer to? This referential language, okay? There are refers to this place that you've mentioned. So not always repeating in the UK, in the UK, in the UK, but using there is, there are to refer back to place. There are currently, so words such as currently also show that you're talking about the closest time period, meaning now. And then make it clear. Make sure you're writing your numbers correctly. No capital letters for words like million. In English, we tend to use commas for the hundreds of thousands and period stops or full stops between numbers when we are writing in the millions. So make sure that even when you're writing numbers that go beyond 1, that the words also don't carry any type of S. Okay, so it's implied within the understanding that the word million is not a word which is countable, though the number is beyond 1. Then we add some more supporting details. So there are 3 types of supporting details here. One that just very generally references studies and shows that there is it's cohesive with the problem statement, that the numbers are increasing, so this is a problem. Specific details that show what the numbers actually are, but you cannot just simply leave the numbers there as dry information. Explain why you've mentioned these numbers. Why is there 2.5 million grey squirrels compared to 140,000? How did these numbers get there? So here we've got a very similar phrase to what we used before, like one of the disadvantages, one of the reasons. Okay. You can also change this if you felt it's too repetitive. You can say a reason for this, or reason for such a heavy decline in the red squirrels is because. So we've got that is and then because. We're now providing that reason for mentioning these numbers. So you are going to need language of reasoning. Is because, is as a result of. So here we have is because, and then a subject-verb-object structure. There is fierce competition between the 2 species. I don't want to repeat red squirrel, grey squirrel, so I group them, the 2 species, for food and shelter. And then this relative pronoun which, meaning all that information I've just said, the fierce competition between them, this has led to the grey squirrel becoming the more dominant and strongest of the species. So here we really get to use this comparative adjective, the more dominant, the superlative, and strongest. So it's a parallel phrase, so I don't have to repeat the more. So once I've said it, the more dominant, and I use coordinated conjunction and, so that I don't have to repeat the more again. But that is a superlative construction which compares at the highest level. It takes the grey squirrel out of the group of all squirrels. So this group that we're talking about is the red and the grey put together. So the grey squirrel becoming the more dominant and strongest of the species. So we've now explained what our numbers mean. And lastly, that concluding sentence in the paragraph, this circumstance. So it's a nice phrase to use to show that everything I've explained here is a situation, is a circumstance. So you can say this circumstance, this situation, or this phenomenon, or this problem. So you're saying everything that I've written here, I'm now going to link it to something else. I'm going to show progression. I'm going to show that I can make sure all my sentences are linked. So here, the word populations was mentioned here. I talked about the population numbers here. I made the numbers specific here. I explained why the numbers are the way they are. And now I'm talking about the future of this problem with language may lead to. So now you know that I'm in my concluding sentence because I'm talking about the future, possible, what's possible in the future, our predictions. So that cohesion must be maintained even within the ideas leading up to prediction. So we've got this progression going through our topic sentence, our supporting sentences that funnel down into those from the greater to the smaller and more specific reasoning, and then showing how it leads to what? It may lead to the extinction of the red squirrel, and as a result, so that future prediction, what's the result of it? The coniferous tree population. So you would have had to have read up some information about this, which relies heavily on the seed distribution work of the red squirrels, not the grey ones. Remember, this is not a concluding paragraph. This is a concluding sentence. There's not an issue if you have some information which is new that actually explains why the numbers, the differences in numbers are actually so important. Here, it's okay to put some type of new information because you're still within your main body. But it's not information that is outside of the scope of what we are talking about. It's absolutely linked to the numbers of the red squirrel. So it's almost a very subtle cause and effect sentence. So you can see how the main image of this paragraph is compare and contrast. But there is no reason why you cannot, within a compare and contrast, give reasons to support your answers, talk about disadvantages, show how there is some type of cause and effect. So when the numbers of the squirrels go down, the tree population will go down because it needs the red squirrel to collect the seeds and distribute them. This is the work of the red squirrel, and we compare it. It's not work that grey squirrels do. So we are still comparing, even though we're in the idea that we're explaining a cause and effect situation. A very sophisticated way of writing. If you can achieve this within your concluding sentence with prediction, that you see how this language or this circumstance will lead on to something else, then use this language may lead to and explain, without really adding too much details or new information, but making that key link. So far this is what we have. 3 paragraphs of the 4-paragraph essay. We've now just completed this information about the numbers declining, and we want to get into the conclusion. So what I've done here now is just flipped the cone so that once you get from the top end of the cone, it widens out. So this is a widening funnel approach as you go to your concluding paragraph. restate your thesis statement. Together, summarise both your important details and the main idea, or any main ideas that you've come up with. You also want to connect everything that you have written about to the world. You know, you are part of a global community. So how does your essay acknowledge that this is, you know, there's something that you can connect to the wider community? And then if you want any recommendations looking forward, you can put those recommendations there at the end. Okay, so let's stick to this widening funnel approach as we go into our conclusion. Red and grey squirrels, despite being a common sight in the UK, are failing to coexist peacefully. Even though they are from similar species, their physical characteristics and ability to survive in their respective habitats differ greatly. So, just to mention here, that is a restating of the thesis, but paraphrased. Everything that we've been writing about here has been about the UK. You can see them in the UK. They're not peaceful together because the red squirrel is dominant and they fight for food. They are similar species. They are both types of squirrels. They differ maybe in their physical characteristics. And they're not able to survive the same way. So even though they're from the same, so that even their language, they differ. They're not the same in the way that they live. The numbers of the red are going down while the grey ones are increasing. So let's summarise some of the ideas and those important details that we put in. While the red squirrel enjoys a lifestyle high up on the canopies of the trees, distributing seeds and helping trees to grow. So remember some of that language we have used there to describe. We're now summarising this. It enjoys its lifestyle, the red squirrels, up in the trees, because it doesn't get hunted there. But they are often under threat by the larger, more aggressive grey squirrel, whose size and population numbers dominate. So that really was the summary of the entire essay. So then we want to use some language connecting to the wider world, looking forward with our recommendations. So language such as looking forward helps us to push that into the future. You can say in the future if you want. More must be done to not only protect the existing red squirrel species in the UK, but to also find ways to increase their numbers. So this is the whole point. We don't want to change their physical characteristics. There's nothing we can do about that. But the things that we can change is their habitat. How, increasing the numbers. Those are the things that you can change and give recommendations for. So what is the recommendation? Well, it is possible that the red squirrel can be kept in isolation, kept alone. So use those academic words. In order to, so that's showing the progression, the result, in order to help it breed and grow in numbers and strength before being introduced into nature. So it's a very nice, and it's a typical recommendation when you are talking about endangered species. You isolate the endangered species, human beings help them grow in enclosures, and then they release them back into the wild. So make sure you are using information that is actual factual. Don't try to make up information at this level. So that's what the entire compare and contrast essay will look like. In the introduction we have that widening funnel approach. In the main body 1 and 2 features we tried to stay as much on topic by using a technique of cohesion, language that refers back, information that refers back. Try not to, within our supporting details and sentences, try not to repeat so much, so using synonyms. Trying to keep the language at the B2 level by using idiomatic phrases. So make sure that is language that is really there in your essay. And then when you get to the conclusion part, using that widening funnel down approach to make sure that you are going from the greater to the, from the smaller to the greater, so that all those, your thesis, your main ideas, your specific details, and then widening it out into that prediction and what should happen in future. So let's have a look at your essay question and a typical model answer. So here we have the introduction, trying to find something similar to what we were writing, that funnel down approach. So you can have a look at this in your own free time. You can think about those marks that I'm leaving out. As you go through the essay, notice how in some of the attention grabbers, these beginning sentences, we're using rhetorical questioning. Okay, so a hook in the form of a rhetorical question, or a question that provokes interest. So look at how that's constructed. Again, look at how the language of while is there, and how at the very end a comparison, and that's the essay aims are here, the limiting, focusing language. Here, colour coordination. Use the blue to identify your linking sentences, which add cohesion, how they link the paragraph to the one that came before. The yellow as that very hardline topic sentence. Everything in green should be that progressive, specific details. Here you'll see that in the context of this question, so the context of the question that you got with regard to children being working alone or working in groups, you've got the idea that it's about psychology, whereas when we were talking about grey and red squirrels, it was more about, what did we say here? We said it was about ecology. Okay, so ecology. So make that distinction. And then as you get down to the bottom, you can see in main paragraph 2, again, you've got that linking sentence, the topic sentence, and the green here would be your specific details. But as you can see, as in the previous one, language such as therefore and as a result that I've highlighted in red, that brings you into your concluding sentence for the paragraph. Using language like it is likely with the verb will help you to use that predictive, to introduce predictive language. And again here, choosing to allow children to occupy themselves can be, so it's a possibility. Okay, so using language of possibility there. And don't forget, as you come to the conclusion, use that widening, funneling down approach. Restate the thesis statement. You know, the summary of important details and the main idea. Language that pushes or connects to the future. Here, using unless something happens, something else will happen. So unless is a good word to use about the future as a prediction, unless communities are more open-minded and work towards children in special needs and accept their encouraging children. And then you've got this verb will. So unless marries with will. Have a read of that carefully to see how that's constructed. And you should be able to get to your prediction or the end of your prediction in a very fluid and cohesive manner. So that brings us to the end of the writing tutorial, and I hope it's been very useful for you. You can go ahead and practice maybe writing your own compare and contrast essay. Here we've used the topic of the grey and the red squirrel. You may choose to use other animals just to practice using numbers and comparing features. You might want to compare two other topics such as electric cars and cars that use diesel. You might want to play devil's advocate. In fact, most people will say that, you know, when you compare an electric car to a diesel car, of course the electric car will come out better, but you might, use more high-level order critical thinking skills and evaluate maybe the possibility that actually diesel cars are more convenient, and in terms of the situation we are in now, makes it easier to access petrol than it is to charge your car, especially in countries like in the UK where it could be, weather could affect electricity and things like this. You may look at comparing and contrasting situations in your country. So what your capital city is like in 2022 compared to 1982, what the differences are there. Really challenging yourself, to compare and contrast would be to do something similar to that, to compare timelines, different points in time. They're not so easy to do, and you really have to focus on your topic and how to narrow down your topic. The most important thing is that you go back and you revisit how the entire essay is structured, how a paragraph in itself is structured, especially for the main body, and how the funneling approach is a very useful technique to use for the introduction and the conclusion, and then revisit the discussions that were had in the main body 1. All of those points that are raised in sentence structure and the way we use words and how we pair our words together, our subjects and our verbs having to agree. These are the main errors that come up, the main mechanical errors that come up in the writing pieces. So please make sure you revisit that and you are editing and proofing your work before submission. Thank you.